My dear, you must listen closely to what I have to say. It's of utmost importance. Pretend you are my son's fiancée.
The garden party at Pemberton Estate bloomed with the calculated elegance of the season's most exclusive gathering. Striped silk pavilions dotted the manicured lawn like pastel jewels, while London's elite drifted between displays of prized roses and tables groaning under arrangements of champagne flutes and honeyed pastries. Somewhere, a string quartet played something appropriately bucolic. Lady Annabel Sutherland had claimed what she desperately hoped was the most inconspicuous position available. A small wrought iron table tucked behind Lady Pemberton's ostentatious topiary peacock, just distant enough from the main terrace to avoid sustained scrutiny. It would have been perfect sanctuary, if not for Baron. Her Samoyed puppy, all white fluff and gleeful chaos, sat at her feet with an expression of angelic innocence that Annabel had learned never to trust. She'd tied his lead to her chair 3 times. He'd escaped twice. Currently, his dark eyes tracked a passing tray of canapés with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. "Stay," Annabel whispered, using her most commanding tone. Baron's tail began to wag. That was never a good sign. At 24, Annabel had become remarkably skilled at strategic retreat. Not because she was shy, quite the opposite, in fact. During her debut 3 seasons ago, her vivacity and unconventional wit had made her something of a novelty. But after her father's disastrous shipping venture had collapsed, dragging the Sutherland fortune down with it, her sparkle had become a liability rather than an asset. Charm without a dowry was merely noise. Beauty without prospects was invisible. She'd learned to make herself small, to smile politely and leave early, to avoid the pitying looks from former friends and the calculating assessments from mothers who'd once welcomed her and now steered their sons away as if poverty were contagious. Baron, however, had never learned anything of the sort. The puppy lunged. Annabel grabbed for the lead a half-second too late. Baron hit the end of his tether, the chair tipped, and Annabel's teacup, Meissen, naturally, because Lady Pemberton only served on Meissen, launched into the air in a graceful arc before shattering spectacularly on the stone pathway. The string quartet faltered. Conversation stopped. 24 pairs of aristocratic eyes turned toward the topiary peacock. And from those gathered ladies emerged a figure Annabel recognized with sinking dread. Duchess Helena of Harrington, a woman whose posture suggested she'd been born giving orders and whose expression suggested she'd never heard the word no. The Duchess's sharp gaze moved from the porcelain shards to the panting Samoyed to Annabel's mortified face. Then, incomprehensibly, the Duchess smiled. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the garden with the precision of a blade. "The girl with the unruly animal. You are precisely what my son needs." Annabel blinked. Baron barked joyfully, as if he'd just been complimented. "Come here," the Duchess commanded. "Immediately." "My beautiful family, before we dive into Annabel's story, I need to share something important with you. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and right now, there are only limited spots to be among our founding 1,000, our inner circle who were here from the beginning. And I want you to be among our most cherished first 1,000. These first 1,000 subscribers will always hold a special place in this community. You'll be the ones who believed in these stories when we were just starting out, the ones who helped build something beautiful. But here's the thing. Once we hit that milestone, that opportunity closes forever. You'll still be welcome, but you won't be part of that exclusive founding group who shaped this channel's journey. So if you've been watching without subscribing, now is your moment. Don't let this story end without you being part of our family. despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. Despite Baron now actively sniffing at what appeared to be the Duchess's hem. Despite the entire party watching with expressions ranging from horror to fascination, Annabelle stood, gathered Baron's lead, and walked directly into whatever catastrophe awaited her. The Duchess didn't wait for introductions. She grasped Annabelle's elbow with surprising strength and steered her toward a more secluded corner of the garden, away from the goggling crowd. Baron trotted along cheerfully, clearly delighted with this turn of events. "Lady Annabelle Sutherland, is it not?" The Duchess didn't wait for confirmation. "Weathered the shipping scandal admirably, from what I hear. No hysterics, no desperate husband hunting, just quiet dignity and an apparent commitment to social suicide via canine companion. Your Grace, I'm terribly sorry about the teacup. I'll of course replace. Don't be tedious." The Duchess waved a dismissive hand. "I care nothing for Meissen. I care about solving a rather urgent problem, and you, my dear, have just presented yourself as the solution." Annabelle's stomach performed an uncomfortable flip. In her experience, when powerful people called you a solution, you were actually about to become a sacrifice. "My son," the Duchess continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, "the Duke of Harrington is being systematically hunted by every ambitious mother in London. The situation has become untenable. He cannot attend a single function without being cornered by some simpering miss with designs on his title. It's affecting his work, his temper, and my patience." Baron chose this moment to sit directly on Annabelle's foot, panting happily up at the Duchess. "I need," the Duchess said, eyeing Baron with what might have been approval, "a temporary fiancée. Someone utterly unsuitable by conventional standards, but just credible enough to be believed. Someone who will require no actual courtship, expect no genuine affection, and disappear quietly when the arrangement concludes." The words hit Annabelle like ice water. "You want me to pretend to be engaged to your son. For 3 months. In exchange for which, I will settle your father's remaining debts. All of them. You'll walk away with your family's reputation restored and enough income to live comfortably, if modestly, for the foreseeable future." Annabelle's breath caught. Freedom. Security. The ability to keep Baron instead of selling him to some country squire who'd promised her a pittance for the privilege. Everything she'd been desperately hoping for, wrapped in the most absurd proposal she'd ever heard. "And the Duke?" she managed. "Does he know about this plan?" "Julian will do as he's told," the Duchess said, in a tone that suggested this was fact rather than optimism. "He trusts my judgment in all matters." Annabelle highly doubted that any grown man, especially a duke, enjoyed having his romantic life managed by his mother. But she was hardly in a position to argue. "There's one condition," Annabelle said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Baron comes with me. Wherever I'm expected to reside during this arrangement, he must be welcome." The Duchess looked down at the Samoyed, who had now flopped onto his back, presenting his fluffy belly to the world with shameless optimism. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "The dog stays." Agreed. Before Annabelle could process what she was agreeing to, the Duchess had turned back toward the party, her voice rising to carry across the entire garden. "Ladies, I have the most delightful news to share. My dear son, the Duke of Harrington, has finally found his match. Lady Annabelle Sutherland has consented to become his fiancée." The garden erupted into shocked gasps and frenzied whispers. Baron barked triumphantly, as if he'd orchestrated the whole thing. Annabelle stood frozen, her life irrevocably altered by a broken teacup and a duchess's desperation. She realized with creeping horror and wild, inappropriate hope, spectacularly unprepared for what came next. The carriage ride home felt like traveling through fog. Annabelle sat with Baron's head in her lap, his white fur already shedding onto her second-best day dress, the one she'd chosen specifically because it hid stains well. Her mother would have 40 different opinions about what had just happened, 39 of which would be expressed at volumes that could shatter glass. "We're engaged," Annabelle said aloud, testing the words. Baron's tail thumped against the carriage seat. "To a duke we've never met. A duke whose mother just bartered for us like we were prize livestock at a country fair." Baron sneezed, which Annabelle chose to interpret as agreement. The Sutherland townhouse appeared far too quickly. It had once been fashionable, back when her father's ships actually returned from their voyages laden with profitable cargo instead of debt notices. Now the paint peeled delicately around the windows, and the front steps had developed a concerning tilt that everyone politely ignored. Annabelle's mother met her at the door, still wearing the anxious expression that had become her permanent feature over the past 2 years. "Darling, you're home early. Did something happen? Mrs. Pemberton didn't take offense to Baron, did she? I told you bringing him was too great a risk." "Mother." Annabelle stepped inside, Baron trotting past her toward the kitchen where he knew Cook kept scraps. "I need you to sit down." Lady Sutherland's face went through several complicated arrangements before settling on dread. "Oh God, what did he destroy this time? Please tell me it wasn't anything irreplaceable." "We can't afford irreplaceable." "He broke a Meissen teacup," Annabelle said, removing her gloves with fingers that trembled only slightly. "And then the Duchess of Harrington announced my engagement to her son." Silence. Complete, ringing silence. Then, "I beg your pardon?" Annabelle explained. The whole absurd proposal, the 3-month arrangement, the promise of debt forgiveness and future income. Her mother listened with an expression that cycled through disbelief, horror, calculation, and finally landed somewhere near cautious hope. "The Duke of Harrington," her mother repeated slowly. "Julian Ashworth, one of the wealthiest men in England, famously reclusive, handsome from what I recall, though terribly serious." She paused. "And his mother wants you to pretend to be his fiancée. For 3 months. In exchange for our debts being cleared. All of them." Her mother sat down rather suddenly on the threadbare settee. "Sweet, merciful heavens." Baron reappeared from the kitchen, carrying what looked suspiciously like an entire sausage. Neither woman acknowledged this theft. "It's fraud," Annabelle's mother said weakly. "We could be ruined if anyone discovers the truth." "We're already ruined, Mother. We're just doing it very quietly." Annabelle sat beside her, suddenly exhausted. The Duchess was quite clear. 3 months of public appearances, just enough to discourage the husband hunters circling her son. Then a quiet dissolution of the engagement, a generous settlement, and we never speak of it again. "And you agreed to this?" "I negotiated, actually. Baron comes with me." Her mother looked at the puppy, who had somehow gotten sausage grease on his ear. "You bargained for the dog?" "He's non-negotiable." Something that might have been a laugh escaped her mother's lips, or possibly a sob. "Your father would have found this either brilliant or horrifying. I honestly can't decide which." Annabelle thought of her father, who died 6 months ago, still apologizing for the shipping venture that had destroyed them. Who'd made her promise to take care of her mother and find some way forward, even if it wasn't the glittering future he'd once imagined for her. "I think," she said carefully, "he would have told me to be practical. and this is possibly the most practical decision I've ever made, even if it's wrapped in complete insanity." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "When do you meet him?" "The Duke?" "Tomorrow." Apparently the Duchess doesn't believe in long engagements, or indeed courtships that involve the actual participants knowing each other beforehand. "And if he refuses? If he's furious with his mother for this arrangement?" Annabel had considered this, had worried it like a loose tooth during the entire carriage ride home. "Then I suppose I'll have broken the shortest engagement in London history, acquired a reputation for spectacular presumption, and will be exactly where we started. Except with one fewer Meissen teacup in the world." Baron finished his sausage and promptly fell asleep across both their laps, snoring like a tiny, furry thunderstorm. "He really is a terrible dog," her mother observed. "The worst," Annabel agreed fondly. "And you're truly willing to drag him into a duke's household for 3 months. The Duchess seems to find him charming." "The Duchess," her mother said dryly, "is clearly deranged, which I suppose works in our favor." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around them like dust. Outside, London continued its indifferent bustle. Inside, everything had changed, and nothing had changed simultaneously. "I'll need new dresses," Annabel said finally. "If I'm to be a duke's fiancée, even a temporary one, I can't appear in rags. The Duchess will provide them. She must. It's in her interest to make you presentable." "How wonderfully mercenary." "Darling," her mother said, with the first real smile Annabel had seen in months, "we're pretending to marry you off to a stranger for money." We passed mercenary somewhere around the broken teacup. Baron snored louder, as if to punctuate this observation. Annabel looked down at him, this ridiculous puppy who'd somehow catapulted her into the most absurd adventure imaginable, and felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite hope. She wasn't foolish enough for that, but perhaps possibility. Tomorrow she would meet the Duke. Tomorrow her fake engagement would begin in earnest. Tomorrow she would step into a world of borrowed elegance and calculated deception. Tonight, she would sleep in her own bed with her terrible puppy in her crumbling house and pretend that she knew what she was doing. After all, she thought, as Baron drooled onto her dress, things could hardly get worse. She was, of course, spectacularly wrong. Harrington House loomed before Annabel like a monument to everything she was not. Wealthy, established, and intimidatingly symmetrical. The Georgian facade stretched across an entire block of Mayfair, its windows gleaming with the kind of cleanliness that suggested an army of servants waged daily war against the very concept of dust. Even the brass knocker appeared to judge her. Baron, mercifully, seemed unimpressed. He sniffed at the marble steps with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for the broken gutter behind their townhouse. "Remember what we discussed," Annabel murmured, adjusting her new dress, courtesy of the Duchess, delivered that morning with terrifying efficiency. "Best behavior. No jumping, no stealing food, no." The door opened before she could finish cataloging Baron's many potential offenses. A butler materialized, so perfectly composed he might have been carved from stone. "Lady Annabel Sutherland," he announced, as if her presence had been expected since the dawn of time. "Her Grace and His Grace await you in the blue drawing room." The interior of Harrington House made the exterior look modest. Annabel's footsteps echoed across marble floors so polished she could see her reflection. Gilt-framed portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her progress with what she imagined was disapproval. Everything gleamed. Everything was silent. Even the air felt expensive. Baron's claws clicked against the marble with each step, obscenely loud in the cathedral-like hush. The blue drawing room was, predictably, blue. Also vast. Also filled with furniture that probably cost more than her family's entire townhouse. The Duchess sat in a wingback chair near the fireplace, looking exactly as imperious as Annabel remembered. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was presumably the man she was supposed to marry. The Duke of Harrington turned as she entered, and Annabel's first thought was that her mother had been wrong. He wasn't handsome. He was something far more inconvenient, striking. Dark hair, severe features, and eyes the color of winter storms. He wore his tailored coat like armor, and his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in England. His gaze moved from Annabel to Baron, and something that might have been horror flickered across his face. "Julian, darling," the Duchess said brightly, "your fiancé has arrived." The silence that followed could have suffocated small animals. "Mother," the Duke said, his voice clipped and controlled. "Might I speak with you privately?" "No need for privacy among family," the Duchess replied, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Lady Annabel is practically your wife already." "Lady Annabel," the Duke said, finally addressing her directly, "is a complete stranger accompanied by what appears to be a small bear." "He's a Samoyed," Annabel said, finding her voice. "And his name is Baron." "How delightfully presumptuous." The Duke's tone suggested he found it anything but delightful. "A titled dog for a titled lie." The words landed like a slap. Annabel felt her spine straighten, the same defiance that had gotten her through 3 seasons of social exile rising to the surface. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I'm quite aware this situation is unconventional." "Unconventional," he laughed, though there was no humor in it. "My mother has arranged a fraudulent engagement to a woman I've never met, who apparently cannot be parted from her pet, all to solve a problem I was managing perfectly well on my own." "You call being hunted at every social function managing?" the Duchess interjected. "I call it tolerably avoidable by simply not attending said functions." The Duke's attention returned to Annabel, his gaze assessing and cold. "I assume you're doing this for money." The bluntness should have embarrassed her. Instead, it crystallized something. If they were to survive 3 months of this charade, she couldn't afford to pretend genteel sensibilities she no longer possessed. "Yes," Annabel said. "Your mother offered to clear my family's debts in exchange for 3 months of public pretense. I accepted because the alternative was genteel poverty, and eventually selling Baron to afford next quarter's rent." Something shifted in the Duke's expression. Not warmth, precisely, but perhaps a grudging respect for honesty. "At least you're not pretending this is a love match." "I'm not pretending anything, Your Grace. Your mother made a business proposition. I accepted her terms. If you find those terms unacceptable, I'm certain we can dissolve this arrangement before it proceeds further." Baron chose this moment to sit directly on her foot, panting up at the Duke with an expression of dopey friendliness that completely undermined her attempt at dignity. The Duke stared at the dog. The dog stared back, tongue lolling. "If we proceed," the Duke said slowly, "there will be conditions. I assumed as much. You and that creature will live here, immediately. If we're to convince society this engagement is legitimate, we cannot be seen maintaining separate residences." Annabel's stomach dropped. She'd assumed occasional public appearances, perhaps a dinner or two, not cohabitation with this glacier of a man. "Both of us?" she managed. "Baron included?" "Both of you," the Duke confirmed, his distaste evident. "Though God knows what havoc that animal will wreak on my household." "He's very well behaved," Annabel lied. As if to contradict her, Baron spotted what appeared to be an extremely expensive cushion on a nearby chair and lunged toward it with acquisitive interest. Annabelle yanked on his lead just in time. The Duke's expression suggested he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. "There will be rules," he said. "Extensive rules. About where the dog is permitted, when you're expected to appear, how we conduct ourselves in public." "I'm quite capable of following rules, Your Grace." "Are you?" His gaze dropped to Baron, who was now attempting to chew through his own lead. "Evidence suggests otherwise." The Duchess rose, clearly delighted by the entire exchange. "Excellent. I'll have rooms prepared immediately. Annabelle, dear, you'll occupy the suite adjacent to Julian's chambers, for appearances." "Mother, it's decided." The Duchess swept toward the door. "I'll have your things collected from your townhouse this afternoon, Annabelle. No need to delay the inevitable." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Annabelle alone with the Duke and a puppy who had finally succeeded in chewing through his lead. Baron trotted over to the Duke and sat directly on his polished boots. The Duke looked down at the dog, then at Annabelle, then back at the dog. "3 months," he said, as if reminding himself. 3 months, Annabelle agreed. Baron barked cheerfully, wholly unaware he'd just moved into the least welcoming household in London. The suite adjacent to the Duke's chambers was larger than the entire ground floor of Annabelle's townhouse. Cream silk wallpaper, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and windows that overlooked a private garden so meticulously maintained it appeared artificial. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, its canopy dripping with fabric that probably cost more than Baron's weight in gold. Baron immediately jumped onto it. "No," Annabelle said, too exhausted to muster real authority. "Absolutely not." Baron circled 3 times and flopped down with a contented sigh, white fur exploding across burgundy silk like fresh snow. A knock at the door prevented her from attempting to physically remove him. The Duke entered without waiting for permission, his expression suggesting he'd rather be negotiating with Napoleon. "We need to establish parameters," he said, then stopped. "Is that animal on my guest bed? Technically, it's my bed now. Technically, everything in this house is mine, including apparently my immediate future." He crossed to the bed and stared down at Baron, who wagged his tail in greeting. "Off." Baron's tail wagged harder. "He doesn't respond well to single-word commands," Annabelle offered. "He requires more context." "Context," the Duke repeated flatly. "The dog requires context." "He's very intelligent." Intelligence would suggest not destroying one's environment. This creature appears to operate on pure chaos. Annabelle moved to the bed and gently tugged Baron's collar. He resisted for a moment, then allowed himself to be coaxed down, immediately pivoting to investigate the Duke's boots with intense interest. "Your Grace," Annabelle said, before she could lose her nerve, "I think we should be completely honest with each other. Since we're to live in close quarters for 3 months maintaining an elaborate deception, lies between us seem counterproductive." The Duke's expression shifted, curiosity breaking through the frost. "An interesting proposition from someone whose entire presence here is predicated on lying to society." "Public lies, private truth," Annabelle clarified. "My family is ruined, not fashionably reduced or temporarily embarrassed. Genuinely, catastrophically ruined. My father invested everything in a shipping venture that failed spectacularly. He died still apologizing for it. My mother and I have been selling furniture piece by piece to pay debts we'll never fully clear." She gestured to Baron. "He was a gift from my father before everything collapsed. A foolish, expensive, impractical gift. I should sell him." Everyone tells me I should sell him. But he's the last piece of joy I have left, and I'm apparently too selfish to let him go." The silence stretched. The Duke studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. "That was remarkably honest," he said finally. "You deserve to know who your mother has shackled you to. A desperate woman clinging to a badly behaved dog." Something almost like a smile ghosted across his face. "My mother has excellent instincts for creating chaos. It's her particular talent." "Is that why you agreed to this? To please her?" "I agreed because the alternative was listening to her orchestrate increasingly elaborate schemes until I relented. This way, at least, I have some control over the terms." He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that screamed military precision. "Which brings me to the rules." I assumed there would be rules. First, no genuine affection. What we display in public is performance. In private, we maintain professional distance. Agreed. Second, public intimacy will be minimal and choreographed. A hand on the arm, perhaps a brief waltz. Nothing that suggests actual romantic attachment. That seems counterproductive to convincing society we're engaged. "Society," the Duke said dryly, "will believe what it wants to believe. Half will claim we're madly in love. The other half will speculate about some scandal forcing the match. Both will be wrong, but both will be satisfied they've uncovered the truth." Annabelle had to concede this point. And the third rule? The dog has boundaries. He is not permitted in my study, my bedroom, or the formal dining room. He will not interact with any item of value. He will be walked by servants at scheduled times. And he will be kept under control at all public functions. Baron, as if understanding he was being discussed, chose that moment to trot over to an ornate side table and begin enthusiastically sniffing a porcelain vase that looked vaguely Ming Dynasty. "Baron, no!" Annabelle lunged for him. Baron's tail caught the vase's edge. Everything happened in slow motion. The vase teetering, the Duke moving with surprising speed, his hands shooting out to catch it inches before it shattered against the floor. He straightened, vase secure, and looked at Annabelle with an expression of profound resignation. "This is my life now," he said. "Catching priceless antiquities before your dog destroys them." "I'm so sorry." He doesn't mean he's just curious. He's a menace. But the Duke's tone lacked real heat. He set the vase on a higher shelf, well out of tail range. "Fourth rule. You are personally responsible for all canine-related destruction. I will keep a ledger." "A ledger of Baron's crimes?" "I keep ledgers of everything. It's calming." He turned back to face her, and for the first time, Annabelle saw something beyond the cold, aristocratic mask. Exhaustion, perhaps, or bone-deep weariness. Fifth rule. We survive these 3 months without murdering each other or causing a scandal that destroys both our reputations. After which, you take your settlement and your chaotic animal and disappear, and I return to my quiet, orderly life. You make quiet and orderly sound appealing. You make chaos sound survivable. Baron barked, the sound explosive in the elegant room. Both of them jumped. "What is he doing now?" the Duke demanded. Baron sat in front of the wardrobe, tail wagging, staring at the door with intense focus. "I think," Annabelle said slowly, "he's found something inside." The Duke opened the wardrobe. His favorite riding boots sat on the floor, one of them sporting fresh teeth marks and what appeared to be enthusiastic drool. "When did he? We've been standing right here." He's remarkably fast when motivated. The Duke lifted the damaged boot examining it with the care one might give a wounded soldier. "These were made in Italy. I'll replace them." "With what funds?" "I'll find a way." He set the boot down carefully. "Add it to the ledger, along with the Meissen teacup and whatever else he destroys over the next 3 months. He looked at Baron, who gazed back with unrepentant joy. "This animal is going to cost me a fortune." "He grows on you," Annabel offered weakly, "like a fungus." But when the Duke turned away, Annabel could have sworn she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but not quite hostility either. It was, she supposed, progress. Baron celebrated by attempting to eat the curtain tassel. The announcement of their engagement in the Morning Post generated exactly the reaction Annabel had anticipated. Scandal, speculation, and an unholy amount of gossip about the dog. "Did you see Lady Pemberton's column?" Annabel's mother asked during her first visit to Harrington House, her voice pitched between horror and delight. "She's calling Baron the Samoyed who launched a duchess's scheme." "You're famous, darling. The dog is famous." "The dog," Annabel said wearily, "knocked over Lord Weatherby's champagne at the opera last night. We're not famous. We're notorious." They'd been engaged for precisely 1 week, and already society had divided into factions. One camp found the puppy charming and the match romantically improbable. The other found both the puppy and the match evidence of the Duke's declining judgment. Both camps agreed that watching Annabel attempt to control Baron during public appearances was the most entertainment London had seen in years. The Duke, predictably, was thrilled. "Your animal," he'd said that morning over breakfast, not looking up from his newspaper, "has now been caricatured in 3 separate publications. There's a betting book at White's regarding how long before he destroys something irreplaceable at a royal function. We haven't been invited to any royal functions. Yet, my mother is working on it." He'd turned the page with excessive force. Apparently nothing sells newspapers quite like aristocratic chaos with 4 legs and a tail. But despite his complaints, they'd fallen into something resembling a routine. Breakfast at 8, where they maintained careful silence while Baron begged shamelessly for bacon. Mid-morning, Annabel worked on correspondence while the Duke disappeared into his study to manage the mysterious business that occupied Dukes. Afternoons brought public appearances, walks in the park, visits to the museum, carefully orchestrated encounters where they played their parts with increasing competence. Evenings were the strangest. After dinner, they'd retreat to the blue drawing room, ostensibly to practice appearing comfortable in each other's company. The Duke would read. Annabel would sketch or write letters. Baron would sprawl between them, creating what the Duke called a fur barrier against accidental intimacy. It should have been awkward. Somehow, it wasn't. "He's shedding on the Aubusson again," the Duke observed one evening, not looking up from his book. "He sheds everywhere. It's his primary talent." "I've noticed. I found white fur in my study yesterday, despite that being explicitly forbidden territory. He's very goal-oriented. He's very criminally minded." But the Duke's tone lacked its initial frost. 3 weeks of cohabitation had worn down his sharper edges, revealing something that might have been dry humor underneath. Annabel watched him over her sketchbook. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his cravat, small concessions to privacy he never would have made in the early days. His dark hair fell slightly across his forehead, and he'd developed the habit of absently adjusting his reading glasses when concentrating. "You're staring," he said, still not looking up. "I'm sketching. Those are different activities. Sometimes they overlap." She returned to her drawing, Baron in profile, looking uncharacteristically noble. "Your mother asked when we're planning to tour the art exhibition. She thinks we've been insufficiently public this week. My mother thinks we're insufficiently public if we're not performing our engagement in Trafalgar Square. He finally looked up, removing his glasses. Though she has a point. We've avoided crowds since the opera incident. The champagne wasn't entirely Baron's fault. He lunged at a footman carrying a full tray. Physics dictated the result. He thought the footman had food. Everyone has food to that animal. The Duke set his book aside. We need to improve his behavior before the Devonshire ball next week. My mother has declared it essential we attend, and I'd prefer not to spend the evening apologizing for canine-related property damage. Annabel sighed. I've tried training him. He's remarkably resistant to instruction. Perhaps you're approaching it incorrectly. By all means, Your Grace, demonstrate your superior dog training abilities. She'd meant it sarcastically, but the Duke stood, considering Baron with the same analytical expression he probably used for investment portfolios. He responds to food motivation, yes. He responds to all motivation if it involves food. The Duke disappeared into the hallway, returning moments later with several pieces of dried meat from the kitchen. Baron's head shot up immediately, most at twitching. Sit, the Duke commanded. Baron stared at him blankly. You need to show him, Annabel started to explain. But the Duke held up a hand. He placed the meat on the floor, then physically guided Baron's hindquarters down into a sitting position. The moment Baron's bottom touched the floor, the Duke gave him the treat. Positive reinforcement tied to immediate physical consequence, he explained, already repeating the process. The dog isn't stupid. He simply hasn't understood what behavior produces reward. Annabel watched, fascinated, as the Duke, this reserved, meticulous man who'd initially looked at Baron like a natural disaster, patiently worked through the exercise. His movements were precise, his tone firm but not harsh. And Baron, miraculously, began to respond. After 20 minutes, Baron was sitting on command with reasonable consistency. When did you learn to train dogs? The Duke's expression shifted, something guarded entering his eyes. My father kept hunting dogs. Before he died, he taught me the basics. He cleared his throat. It was one of the few activities we did together. The vulnerability in those words struck Annabel silent. This was the first personal thing he'd shared beyond his irritation with his mother's matchmaking. How old were you? She asked quietly. When he died? 15. Too young to inherit, old enough to understand everything that came with it. He looked down at Baron, who had fallen asleep across his boots. Responsibility, isolation, the weight of everyone's expectations. That sounds lonely. It was practical. Dukes don't have the luxury of loneliness. We have duties. But the way he said it suggested he'd been desperately lonely, had perhaps been lonely for years. Baron snored, a ridiculous trumpeting sound that shattered the moment's gravity. The Duke looked at the dog, then at Annabel, and something extraordinary happened. He smiled. Not the polite social smile he deployed at public functions, but something genuine and unguarded. Your dog, he said, sounds like a distressed goose. He's your dog too for the next 9 weeks. God help us all. But he didn't move his boots, even though Baron was drooling on the leather. Later, after Annabel had retired to her room, she stood at the window overlooking the garden. Below, the Duke walked the paths alone, hands clasped behind his back, the picture of solitary contemplation. She thought of him at 15, inheriting impossible expectations. Thought of him now, teaching tricks to a chaotic puppy he'd never wanted. thought of how his smile had transformed his entire face. This was dangerous territory. The engagement was temporary. The affection was supposed to be false. She couldn't afford to forget that. But watching him disappear into the shadows, Annabelle suspected it was already too late. The letter arrived during breakfast, delivered on a silver tray that made even bad news look elegant. Annabelle watched the Duke's face drain of color as he read, his jaw tightening with each line. Julian? The name slipped out before she could stop it. They'd maintained formal address for 5 weeks, a careful distance that was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. He set the letter down with excessive precision, the way one might handle something contaminated. My cousin has surfaced. Apparently he's in Paris, accumulating gambling debts at an impressive rate. I didn't know you had a cousin. I've been attempting to forget I have a cousin. The Duke's voice was flat, emotionless in the way that suggested enormous emotion held rigidly in check. Edward, my father's younger brother's son. He's been a source of creative catastrophe since birth. Baron, sensing tension, padded over and rested his chin on the Duke's knee. For once, Julian didn't push him away. What kind of catastrophe? Annabelle asked carefully. The expensive kind. Gambling, drinking, a spectacular talent for finding the worst possible company. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. 6 months ago, he forged my signature on several promissory notes, used my name to secure loans he had no intention of repaying. Annabelle's breath caught. That's fraud. That's family. The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. If I expose him, the scandal touches the Harrington name. If I pay his debts, again, I enable his behavior and he does something worse next time. There are no good options. Is that why your mother orchestrated our engagement? Partially. She believes a forthcoming marriage suggests stability. Makes me look settled, responsible, less vulnerable to my cousin's chaos. He finally met her eyes. I'm sorry. You agreed to play the role of adoring fiancée, not confidant to my family's dysfunction. We live in the same house, share meals, manage a dog together. I think we've exceeded the basic contractual obligations. She hesitated. Besides, I understand complicated family situations. Something shifted in his expression, not quite warmth, but an easing of the rigid control he maintained. Like armor, the rest of breakfast passed in silence, but it felt different than their usual careful quiet. Shared rather than separate. That afternoon, Annabelle found the Duke in the garden, attempting to build something with wooden boards and what appeared to be excessive frustration. What, she asked, are you doing? Building a barrier. He gestured to a flower bed Baron had recently excavated with archaeological enthusiasm. If I can train him to stay within certain boundaries, perhaps we can attend the Devonshire ball without him destroying a priceless family heirloom. You're building a fence for my dog. I'm building a fence for my sanity. Annabelle watched him work. This meticulous man who'd never wanted a dog, now constructing elaborate preventative measures to manage one. Baron supervised from a nearby patch of sun, panting happily. It's too tall, she observed. He'll just go around it. The point is to create a visual boundary that... The Duke stopped as Baron stood, stretched, and walked directly through the 18-inch gap he'd left for the gate. That he will immediately ignore. Excellent. Baron trotted to the excavated flower bed and began digging with renewed vigor. Baron, no, Annabelle called. The Duke made a sound, half sigh, half laugh, that turned into actual laughter as Baron emerged from the hole covered in dirt, a satisfied expression on his face. carrying what appeared to be a very dead, very decomposed something in his mouth. Was that a rat? The Duke stared in horror. I think it was a rat. He's redecorating with corpses now. Wonderful. The flower bed wasn't destroyed enough, so he's added plague elements. Baron dropped his prize at the Duke's feet like a gift, tail wagging with pride. And Julian laughed. Not the polite chuckle of social occasions, but a genuine, helpless laugh that transformed his entire face. The rigid control cracked, revealing someone younger, lighter, almost boyish. Annabelle felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Your dog, Julian managed between laughs, is absolutely disgusting. He's celebrating his archaeological discovery. He's celebrating pestilence. But he was smiling, really smiling. And Annabelle realized she'd never seen him look this unguarded. Baron barked triumphantly and shook, sending dirt flying across both of them. Later, after Baron had been forcibly bathed and the rat had been disposed of with appropriate ceremony, Annabelle found Julian in the library. He'd changed clothes but still had a smudge of dirt on his collar he'd missed. You have? She gestured to her own collar. He wiped at it absently, succeeding only in spreading the dirt. Hazards of dog ownership. Temporary dog ownership. Something flickered in his eyes. Yes, temporary. The word sat between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine. Annabelle settled into the chair across from his desk, Baron collapsing at her feet in an exhausted heap. Can I ask you something? That's generally what one does before asking something. When this ends, the engagement, the arrangement, what happens to me, practically speaking? The question had been building for weeks, fed by sleepless nights and careful calculation. Your mother promised enough to clear our debts and provide income. But for how long? A year? 5 years? What happens when that runs out? Julian set down his pen, giving her his full attention. You're worried about the future. I'm terrified of the future. I've been poor, Julian, genuinely poor. Choosing between heating and food, poor. I can't, her voice caught. I can't go back to that. I can't watch my mother sell her wedding ring for coal again. But I don't know how to prevent it. The vulnerability felt like standing naked in a snowstorm. But he didn't look away, didn't dismiss her fear. The settlement, he said carefully, is structured as an annuity, fixed income for life, not a lump sum you could exhaust. Your mother didn't mention that. My mother specializes in strategic omissions. He pulled paper toward him, began writing. But we can do better. You need security, not charity. Investment advice. Property, perhaps. Something that generates income independent of anyone's goodwill. I don't know anything about investments. I do. He looked up, and his expression was gentle. Let me help. Not as the Duke honoring a contract, but as, he paused, as someone who understands that poverty isn't a moral failing. It's a circumstance that shouldn't define your entire future. Annabelle felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you being kind to me? Why shouldn't I be? Because I'm temporary. Because in 4 weeks, I disappear from your life. Julian's jaw tightened. Perhaps I'm tired of everything in my life being temporary. Perhaps I'd like something, someone, to stay. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and enormous. Baron snored, oblivious to the moment he was interrupting. Julian, Annabelle whispered. We should maintain professional boundaries, he said. But he didn't look away. That was rule 1. You've broken several rules. You built a fence for Baron. The fence didn't work. You tried anyway. They stared at each other across the desk, the pretense crumbling like paper in rain. 4 more weeks, Julian said finally. 4 more weeks, Annabelle agreed. But neither of them believed it anymore. Hyde Park on a Sunday afternoon was a stage, and everyone knew it. The fashionable world paraded along Rotten Row in their finest clothes, seeing and being seen, every glance and gesture catalogued for later gossip. Annabelle had forgotten how exhausting performance could be. "Smile," Julian murmured, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "You look like you're being led to execution." "I'm contemplating the various ways Baron might humiliate us." She forced her expression into something approximating contentment. "He's been too well-behaved this morning. It's suspicious." Baron trotted beside them on his lead, the picture of canine propriety. He'd even tolerated the ridiculous blue ribbon the Duchess had insisted they tie around his neck to complete the aesthetic. "Perhaps he's matured," Julian suggested. "Perhaps he's plotting." They'd practiced this, walking together, maintaining appropriate distance while suggesting intimacy. But something had shifted since their conversation in the library 3 days ago. Julian's hand felt different now, more possessive than performative. And when she glanced up at him, she found him already looking at her with an expression that had nothing to do with their audience. "The Pemberton sisters are watching," she said quietly. 11 o'clock. Let them watch. But he adjusted his posture slightly, drawing her infinitesimally closer. To anyone observing, they looked like lovers too absorbed in each other to notice the world. The irony was that it wasn't entirely acting anymore. "Julian," she started, but was interrupted by a familiar voice. "Your Grace, Lady Annabelle, what a delightful coincidence." Lady Cartwright descended upon them like a perfumed storm, her daughter trailing behind with the resigned expression of someone who'd spent 23 years being dragged to coincidental encounters. "We were just remarking on what a handsome couple you make," Lady Cartwright continued, her eyes sharp with calculation. "And the darling dog, of course. So distinctive." Baron, recognizing attention, sat promptly and offered his paw. It was the trick Julian had taught him last week, and the effect was devastatingly charming. Lady Cartwright actually cooed. They endured 15 minutes of transparent interrogation, disguised as polite conversation. When had they fallen in love? How had the Duke proposed? Wasn't it all terribly romantic and sudden? Annabelle deflected with practiced vagueness, while Julian radiated aristocratic inscrutability. Finally, Lady Cartwright departed to inflict herself on other victims, and they continued their walk. "That was agonizing," Annabelle muttered. "That was tactical. She'll tell everyone we're sickeningly devoted. My mother will be pleased?" "Your mother is always pleased when chaos works in her favor." Julian's laugh was cut short by a commotion ahead. A crowd had gathered near the Serpentine, voices raised in alarm. Baron's ears perked forward, his entire body going alert. "What's happening?" Annabelle tried to see over the crowd. "Stay here." Julian moved forward, and Annabelle followed despite his instruction. Keeping a firm grip on Baron's lead, they pushed through to find a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, sobbing on the bank while his mother stood in the shallow water, her skirt soaked, reaching desperately towards something floating just out of reach. "Please," the woman cried. "Someone help. My son's toy, he'll be inconsolable." "Madam, it's merely a toy," someone said dismissively. "It was his father's, before he died. Please." The crowd murmured sympathetically, but no one moved. Gentlemen in their fine clothes weren't about to wade into the Serpentine for a child's boat. Baron lunged before Annabelle could react, pulling the lead from her grip. He splashed into the water with joyful abandon, paddling directly toward the small wooden boat bobbing in the current. "Baron," Annabelle called, but he was already swimming, powerful legs propelling him forward. He caught the boat gently in his mouth and turned back toward shore, looking absurdly pleased with himself. The child's sobs transformed into delighted laughter. The mother waded forward, meeting Baron halfway, taking the boat with trembling hands. "Oh, thank you," she breathed. "Thank you." Baron shook vigorously, spraying water across everyone within 10 feet. The crowd gasped and stepped back, everyone except Julian, who simply looked resigned. "Your dog is soaked," he observed. "Your dog just performed heroics. My dog just guaranteed will be in tomorrow's society pages, again." But he was smiling as the mother approached, the boy now clutching both the boat and Baron's wet fur. "Your Grace," she said, recognizing Julian. "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank the dog. I had nothing to do with it." The boy looked up at Annabelle with wide eyes. "Is he really yours?" "He is. His name is Baron. He's the best dog in the whole world." Annabelle felt her throat tighten. Yes, he is." The crowd had shifted from disapproval to sentimental approval. Several women were actually dabbing their eyes. Baron had somehow transformed from social liability to romantic hero in under 5 minutes. As they resumed their walk, Baron leaving wet paw prints on the path, a sharp crack split the air. A carriage horse had spooked nearby, rearing violently, the driver struggling to control it. The carriage lurched forward, heading directly toward a group of children feeding ducks at the pond's edge. Everything happened at once. Julian moved, faster than Annabelle had ever seen him move, pulling her hard against his chest and turning his body to shield her as the carriage careened past, missing them by inches. His arms were iron bands around her, his heart hammering against her cheek. The driver finally regained control, the carriage stopping safely. The children were unharmed, their nurse herding them away from the path with scolding efficiency. But Julian didn't let go. Annabelle felt every point of contact. His hand splayed across her back, his other arm around her shoulders, the solid wall of his chest, the ragged edge of his breathing. She tilted her head back to look at him and found his face inches from hers, his eyes dark with something that had nothing to do with the near accident. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. "No. You shielded me." "Instinct?" But the way he was looking at her suggested something beyond instinct. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there. The crowd, the park, all of London, faded to irrelevance. "Julian," she whispered. "We're in public," he said. But he still didn't release her. "Yes. People are watching." "Yes. I'm going to kiss you." "That's not in the rules." "Damn the rules." His mouth found hers with a desperation that stole her breath. This wasn't performance. This wasn't the careful choreography they'd practiced. This was real and raw and absolutely undeniable. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. "That," he said quietly, "was not for show." "I know," Baron barked, reminding them of his presence. And the presence of approximately 50 witnesses who just watched the Duke of Harrington kiss his fiancée like the world was ending. Tomorrow's society pages would be very interesting indeed. But for once, neither of them cared. The kiss in Hyde Park had consequences. 3 days of relentless attention in every society column, 2 dinner invitations Annabelle suspected were designed purely for observation purposes, and 1 extremely pointed letter from Julian's solicitor requesting clarification on the evolving nature of the arrangement. They hadn't discussed it. The kiss. The way Julian now looked at her across the breakfast table, the fact that Baron had taken to sleeping across both their feet during evening readings, as if physically binding them together. They maintained their routine, but the air between them hummed with everything unsaid. Annabel was sketching in the morning room when the card arrived. Lady Amelia Warwick requests the pleasure of Lady Annabel Sutherland's company for tea this afternoon at 3 o'clock. That's ominous, Annabel muttered. She barely knew Lady Amelia, a statuesque blonde who'd been conspicuously absent from Julian's list of potential duchesses, presumably because she was already angling for a different duke entirely. Baron lifted his head from her lap, sensing her tension. "It's probably nothing," she told him. "Just tea." It was not just tea. Lady Amelia's drawing room was decorated in shades of cream and gold that perfectly complemented her complexion, a detail that seemed entirely calculated. She greeted Annabel with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How kind of you to come. I do hope the Duke didn't mind me stealing you away." "He's occupied with business matters." Annabel accepted tea she had no intention of drinking. "Your invitation was quite unexpected." "Yes, well, I felt we should speak privately, woman to woman." Lady Amelia settled into her chair with feline grace. "About your engagement." Every instinct screamed danger. "What about it?" "It's fascinating, really. How quickly it all happened. One moment you're a nobody with a badly behaved dog, the next you're engaged to one of England's most eligible dukes." Her smile sharpened. "Almost as if it were arranged." Annabel's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're implying." "Don't you? Come now, Lady Annabel. We both know your family is destitute. And we both know the Duchess of Harrington has always been rather creative in managing her son's affairs." Lady Amelia sipped her tea delicately. "I have a friend. Works for a very discreet solicitor who handles sensitive financial matters. Imagine my surprise when she mentioned a rather large payment to the Weatherstone estate, dated precisely one day after your engagement was announced." The room tilted. Annabel gripped her teacup to keep her hands from shaking. "That's privileged information. That's leverage." Lady Amelia's mask dropped entirely. "My brother was supposed to marry the Duke's cousin, a beneficial match for both families, until your little performance disrupted everything. Now my brother's engagement prospects are diminished, and I'm expected to smile while you parade around with a purchased title. The engagement is real. The engagement is fraud. And unless you want that information shared with every gossip in London, you'll end it. Quietly. Immediately. You're blackmailing me. I'm correcting an imbalance." Lady Amelia leaned forward. "You have 1 week. Break the engagement, return to whatever poverty you crawled from, and I'll keep your secret. Refuse, and I'll destroy both your reputation and the Duke's. Society will know he was so desperate to escape matchmaking that he paid a fortune for a fake fiancée." "And Baron?" Annabel's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "The dog?" Lady Amelia laughed. "Sell it. Remove it. I don't care. Just remove yourself from the Duke's life." Annabel left without finishing her tea, her legs somehow carrying her to the waiting carriage. Baron whined from inside, sensing her distress before she'd even climbed in. She made it home, no, not home, Harrington House, which had never been home and never would be, before the tears came. Julian found her in the garden an hour later, Baron pressed against her side. "Annabel." He crossed to her immediately. "What happened?" She told him everything, watched his expression shift from concern to fury as the story unfolded. "Let me handle this," he said when she finished. I'll speak to Lady Amelia, threaten legal action, and prove her right? Annabel stood, wrapping her arms around herself. She's not wrong, Julian. This is fraud. We made a business arrangement and dressed it up as romance. If this becomes public, it won't just be my reputation destroyed. It'll be yours. The Duke, who was so pathetic he had to buy a fiancée. I don't care what society thinks. You should. You have responsibilities, a name to protect, and her voice broke. I can't be the reason you lose everything. Not when I've already cost my own family so much. So what? You'll just leave? Walk away? It's what we always planned. That was before. He stopped, jaw clenched. Before everything changed. Nothing's changed. We were always temporary. Don't do this. Don't pretend the last 6 weeks meant nothing. They meant everything. The words tore out of her. That's exactly why I have to leave. Before this destroys you. Before my presence here ruins the one good thing that's happened to me in years. Baron barked, sharp and distressed. Julian reached for her, but she stepped back. Annabel, I'll pack tonight, leave in the morning. We'll say it was a mutual decision, that we realized we weren't suited. No scandal, no exposure. And Baron? The question shattered her. I'll find him a good home. Someone with land, space. Someone who can... She couldn't finish. Julian's expression was devastated. You'd give him up? After everything? I'd give up anything to protect you. The silence stretched, broken only by Baron's anxious panting. Your Grace? The Duchess's voice cut through the tension. She stood at the garden door, her expression unreadable. Might I have a word with Lady Annabel? Privately? Julian looked between them, then nodded stiffly and left. The Duchess settled onto the garden bench, patting the space beside her. Annabel sat, Baron immediately claiming her lap. I know about Lady Amelia's visit, the Duchess said. I have my sources. Then you know I'm leaving. I know you're being a noble idiot. The Duchess's tone was surprisingly gentle. I created this arrangement for practical reasons, Annabel. I needed my son protected from fortune hunters and scandalous cousins. I chose you because you seemed sensible, desperate, and unlikely to develop actual feelings. I'm sorry I disappointed you. You didn't disappoint me. You surprised me. The Duchess looked at her directly. I've watched my son for 6 weeks. I've seen him laugh. Actually laugh, not that polite thing he does at social functions. I've watched him build fences for your ridiculous dog and teach you about investments and look at you like you're the only real thing in his carefully controlled world. Annabel's eyes burned. That's why I have to go. Before this costs him everything. What if staying costs you both more? The Duchess took her hand. I've made many calculations in my life, Annabel. But I've never seen my son happy until you. And I'll be damned if I let some jealous child destroy that. What are you suggesting? The Duchess smiled, sharp and determined. That we fight. Together. All three of us, you, Julian, and the terrifying, scheming mother who started this mess. What do you say, dear? Ready to cause one more scandal? Baron barked his approval. The Devonshire ball was the event of the season, which meant it was the perfect stage for catastrophe. Annabel descended the grand staircase on Julian's arm, acutely aware of every eye tracking their progress. The Duchess had insisted on strategic timing, late enough to make an entrance, early enough to secure maximum witnesses for whatever confrontation Lady Amelia was planning. Baron, in a move that surprised no one more than Annabel herself, trotted beside them, wearing a small, formal collar that made him look like a dignified gentleman. The Duchess had commissioned it specifically for tonight, declaring that if they were going to court scandal, they might as well do it with style. "You're trembling," Julian murmured. "I'm terrified." "Good. So am I." His hand tightened on hers. "But we face it together." The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight, hundreds of London's elites swirling in carefully orchestrated patterns. Annabel spotted Lady Amelia immediately, impossible to miss in ice blue silk, positioned near the refreshment tables where she commanded the best view of the room. "She's waiting," Annabel said. "Let her wait." Julian led her onto the dance floor instead. One waltz before the world ends. It should have been terrifying, this final performance. But as Julian's hand settled at her waist and they began to move, Annabel felt something else entirely. This was real. Whatever happened next, these 6 weeks had been real. "I need to tell you something," Julian said quietly, steering them through the crowd. "Before whatever chaos unfolds tonight. Julian, I love you." The words were simple, direct, devastating. Not the arrangement, not the convenience. You. Your ridiculous optimism and your terrible dog and the way you've turned my perfectly ordered life into beautiful mayhem. I love you, and I'm not letting you go. Annabel missed a step. He steadied her, never breaking rhythm. "You can't," she whispered. "We agreed." "I'm breaking the agreement, all the rules, every careful boundary I constructed." His eyes were fierce. "I'd rather have chaos with you than lonely perfection without you." Before she could respond, the music ended, and Lady Amelia made her move. She crossed the ballroom with predatory grace, 2 other ladies flanking her like supporting infantry. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing drama. "Your Grace," Lady Amelia said loudly enough to silence nearby conversations. "How delightful to see you." And Lady Annabel, of course. With the famous dog. Baron, proving he had remarkable instincts for theatrical timing, sat perfectly and offered his paw. Lady Amelia ignored him. "I wonder if we might have a word about your engagement." "Here?" Julian's tone was glacial. "How unconventional." "Oh, I think the circumstances warrant unconventional approaches." She smiled, sharp as broken glass. "You see, I've recently learned something rather interesting about how this engagement came to be. The financial arrangements, the rather mercenary motivations." The crowd pressed closer. Annabel felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, the hungry anticipation of scandal. "Careful, Lady Amelia," Julian said softly. "You're treading dangerous ground." "Am I? Or am I simply revealing what everyone has suspected? That you were so desperate to escape your social obligations that you purchased a fiancée. That this entire romance is nothing but an elaborate business transaction." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Annabel saw the Duchess moving through the periphery, her expression calculating. "Is that your theory?" Julian asked. "It's the truth. And unless you want every detail published in tomorrow's papers, you'll end this farce. Immediately. Send her away. Remove that ridiculous animal from your home. Return to the dignity befitting your position." The ballroom held its collective breath. Julian looked at Annabel, at Baron, then back at Lady Amelia. "You're absolutely right," he said clearly. Annabel's heart stopped. "The engagement did begin as an arrangement," Julian continued, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "My mother, in her infinite wisdom and questionable judgment, decided I needed protection from fortune hunters. She chose Lady Annabel Sutherland, offered her money to play the role of my fiancée for 3 months. And I agreed, because it seemed easier than the alternative. The crowd erupted in whispers. Lady Amelia's smile turned triumphant. "However," Julian said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade, "what began as arrangement became something else entirely. Something real. Something I didn't know I was capable of feeling." He turned to Annabel, taking both her hands in his. "I fell in love with you," he said, "and the ballroom might as well have been empty. With your strength and your kindness and your absolute refusal to let the world make you bitter. I fell in love with the way you fight for what you love, even when it's a chaotic puppy everyone tells you to abandon. I fell in love with the mess and the noise and the joy you brought into my rigidly controlled life." Annabel couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as he laid his heart bare before hundreds of witnesses. "So yes," Julian said, addressing the crowd again, "our engagement began as a lie. But my love is absolutely, devastatingly true. And I don't give a damn who knows it." The silence was absolute. Then the Duchess began to clap, slowly, deliberately, a smile playing at her lips. Others joined, first a trickle, then a wave, until the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Lady Amelia's face went white with fury. "You're admitting to fraud." "I'm admitting to falling in love," Julian said. "Which, last I checked, wasn't a crime. Though perhaps it should be, given how thoroughly it's destroyed every careful plan I ever made." Baron barked joyfully, as if agreeing. Lady Amelia opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and fled through the crowd. Her companions scattered like startled birds. The Duchess appeared at Annabel's side. "Well," she said pleasantly, "that was dramatic. Shall we retire to somewhere more private before my son declares anything else shocking?" They escaped to a small salon off the main ballroom, Baron trotting between them. The moment the door closed, Annabel turned to Julian. "You didn't have to do that. You've exposed yourself to what? Gossip? I've endured gossip my entire life." He cupped her face in his hands. "What I can't endure is losing you." "I meant every word, Annabel. I love the chaos. I love the disorder. I love coming home to dog hair on my furniture and you sketching in my study and the complete destruction of every boundary I thought I needed." "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I do. So much." "Then marry me. Not for 3 months. Not for show. Actually, marry me." "Your Grace," the Duchess interrupted gently, "you might want to let her catch her breath before proposing." "Actually," Annabel said, laughing through tears, "I think I've caught it." She looked at Julian, at his hopeful, vulnerable expression. "Yes, to all of it. The chaos and the disorder and the real marriage." Baron celebrated by jumping on the expensive settee. For once, no one stopped him. The real proposal happened 3 days later, in the same garden where Baron had first excavated his treasure of decomposed rat. Annabel was sketching, while Baron methodically destroyed what remained of Julian's careful landscaping. The puppy had developed a particular fondness for the rose bushes, which the gardener now regarded with the resignation of a man who'd accepted defeat. "He's ruining the eastern border," Julian observed, settling beside her on the bench. "He's landscaping. There's a difference." The gardener would disagree. The gardener has been disagreeing for weeks. Baron remains undeterred. She smiled as the puppy emerged from the roses covered in petals and dirt, looking absurdly proud. I think he's making improvements. He's making chaos. You love chaos now. You said so in front of 300 witnesses. I said I love your chaos. Baron's chaos is merely tolerated. But Julian was smiling, the genuine smile that still made her heart stumble. The scandal from the Devonshire ball had lasted exactly 4 days before being supplanted by news of a viscount's daughter eloping with her riding instructor. London society, it turned out, had a remarkably short attention span when presented with fresher drama. Lady Amelia had retreated to the country, her threat neutralized by Julian's public confession. The Duchess had been insufferably smug about the entire affair, claiming she'd orchestrated everything perfectly, despite having no control over half of what had happened. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Annabel set down her sketchbook. "Julian, you've already given me everything. The settlement, the investments, This isn't obligation. It's choice." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in brilliant fragments. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and unconventional. "I chose this instead of the family ring because I wanted something that was ours. Not inherited obligation, but deliberate decision." Her breath caught. "Annabel Sutherland," Julian said, and his voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Not as part of an arrangement or a performance, but as my actual wife. Will you bring your chaos and your terrible dog and your sketches into my life permanently? Will you let me love you, not for 3 months, but for every day I have left?" Baron barked, as if adding his endorsement. "Yes," Annabel said, tears spilling over. "Yes to all of it. The marriage and the chaos and the permanent residency of one badly behaved Samoyed." Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a thoroughness that suggested he'd been practicing restraint for far too long. Baron celebrated by rolling in the rose bushes, sending petals everywhere. "When?" Annabel asked when they finally broke apart. "When what?" "When should we marry? Your mother will want to plan something elaborate. Next week." She blinked. "Next week? Julian, that's impossible. The arrangements alone. My mother has been planning this wedding since the day she orchestrated our fake engagement. She has files, extensive files. We could marry tomorrow if I pushed hard enough." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've spent 6 weeks pretending you were temporary. I don't want to pretend anymore." "Next week, then?" She laughed, slightly dizzy with happiness. "Though your mother is going to be unbearable." "My mother has been unbearable for 53 years. We'll survive." Baron trotted over and deposited a destroyed rose at their feet, tail wagging expectantly. "He's brought you an engagement gift," Annabel said. "He's brought me evidence of horticultural murder." "Same thing, really." Julian looked at the dog, at the demolished garden, at Annabel with her ring catching sunlight and her smile lighting something in his chest that had been dark for years. "I never wanted any of this," he said quietly. "The dog, the chaos, the complete destruction of my carefully ordered life. I know. I can't imagine living without it now." "I know that too." They sat in comfortable silence while Baron continued his excavation project. The afternoon sun warm on their faces and the future stretching before them like an unwritten page. 6 months later, the Duke and Duchess of Harrington were discovered in their garden on a Tuesday afternoon. The Duke was reading correspondence while his wife sketched nearby, her hand occasionally reaching to adjust the hat that kept sliding off her head. Between them, a fully grown Samoyed had excavated an impressive hole in what had once been an award-winning flower bed. "He's destroying the dahlias," the Duchess observed without looking up from her drawing. "I'm aware." The Duke didn't look up from his letters. "Shouldn't you stop him?" "I've learned that stopping Baron is both futile and exhausting. I'm choosing to accept chaos as my default state." Annabel laughed, the sound carrying across the garden. The great Duke of Harrington, defeated by a dog. Not defeated, strategically surrendering. He finally looked up, catching her expression of pure joy, and felt his own face soften in response. "There's a difference." Baron emerged from his hole carrying what appeared to be a bone of mysterious origin. He dropped it proudly at Julian's feet. "Is that from the kitchen?" Annabel asked. "I sincerely hope so. Though with Baron, one can never be certain." The puppy, no longer really a puppy, but they still called him one, barked and shook, sending dirt across both of them. Julian's pristine white shirt now bore several muddy paw prints. 3 months ago, this would have horrified him. Now he simply brushed at the dirt absently and returned to his correspondence. "Your mother is hosting another charitable event next week," Annabel said. "She wants us to attend, with Baron. God help us all. She says he's become a draw. People specifically ask if the Duke's dog will be present." "The Duke's dog," Julian repeated, as if I had any choice in the matter. "You love him." "I tolerate him because I love you. You built him a custom fence last week. To protect the remaining garden. You taught him to fetch your newspaper. For practical reasons. You let him sleep on our bed." Julian set down his letters, defeated. "Fine. I love the ridiculous animal. Are you satisfied?" "Immensely." She moved to sit beside him, Baron immediately claiming the space between them. "Though I should warn you, I've been thinking. That's never good. Baron needs a companion. Another dog would keep him occupied, less likely to destroy things. Absolutely not. A small one, perhaps a terrier, Annabel, or a rescue. Something that needs a home." He kissed her, effectively ending the negotiation. Baron barked his approval. When they broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "One dog. That was the agreement. We've broken every other agreement. Why stop now? You're going to be the death of me. But what a way to go." He laughed, the sound free and genuine, and pulled her closer. Baron squeezed between them, panting happily, covering them both in dog hair and garden dirt. The Duchess of Harrington watched from the house, a rare genuine smile on her face. Her son had finally found happiness, even if it came covered in fur and chaos. Sometimes, she reflected, the best schemes were the ones that exceeded their original intent. In the garden, the Duke kissed his wife while their dog barked at a butterfly. The flower beds were destroyed. The lawn was pockmarked with holes, and dog hair covered every surface. It was, Julian thought, absolutely perfect. Baron barked again, this time at nothing in particular, just for the pure joy of making noise. "We're getting another dog, aren't we?" Julian said. "Probably," Annabel admitted. "God help me." But he was smiling as he said it, and when Baron started digging a new hole in the freshly seeded lawn, the Duke of Harrington simply shook his head and went back to kissing his wife. After all, some chaos was worth embracing. And that's it. Annabel got her happy ending. Julian got his chaos. Baron got his forever home. But here's the thing. This is probably the last time you and I will ever interact unless you subscribe. Because if you don't, you'll never see the next story. You'll never meet the next characters who make you feel this way. You'll scroll past this video in a week and vaguely remember that story with the dog. But you won't be able to find it again. And that story I'm writing right now, the one that's even better than this, you'll miss it entirely. So here's your choice. Click subscribe and stay part of this community, or walk away and let this be a one-time thing we never talk about again. Also, share this video. Because somewhere out there is someone having a terrible day who desperately needs to escape into a story about a chaotic puppy and a grumpy duke. You could be the person who gives them that gift. Or you could keep it to yourself. Your choice, but choose wisely. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.